The voice came from inside the recorder 3 weeks after the flight was canceled. Senior maintenance engineer Thomas Hartwell heard himself screaming commands he never gave to a crew that was never there. Hartwell worked 22 years for Continental Regional at Denver International Airport, specializing in avionics and flight recorder diagnostics. His reputation was built on precision, methodical troubleshooting, and an unwavering attention to detail that had earned him recognition from both management and his peers. He did not believe in ghosts, equipment malfunction without logical cause, or coincidence. But on the morning of November 14, 2023, all three beliefs shattered when he connected a standard playback device to the cockpit voice recorder of aircraft November 738 Alfa Romeo, a Boeing 737-800 that had been grounded for routine hydraulic inspection and never left the tarmac. Before we go deeper, make sure to subscribe now. This channel exposes aviation mysteries and forbidden reports the industry tries to hide. Turn on notifications so you do not miss the next investigation. The aircraft had arrived at Gate 12 on November 9th from Chicago O'Hare, completing what would be its final scheduled flight. No subsequent departure was scheduled. The plane was immediately flagged for a comprehensive hydraulic system inspection, part of Continental's enhanced maintenance protocol following recent FAA directives regarding Boeing 737 hydraulic redundancy checks. The engines were never started after shutdown. The auxiliary power unit remained cold and disconnected. According to maintenance logs meticulously kept by the Denver facility, the plane sat completely dormant for 5 full days. Its electrical systems powered down, its cockpit empty and silent. On the 13th, Hartwell and his team began their inspection. The work required systematic examination of the aircraft's 3 independent hydraulic systems, a process that typically took 2 days for a crew of 4 certified technicians. Standard procedure required downloading data from both the flight data recorder and the cockpit voice recorder to verify system integrity before the aircraft returned to service. This download process served dual purposes: ensuring the recorders functioned properly and creating a baseline reference for any anomalies that might occur during the inspection itself. Hartwell handled the CVR himself. He had performed this exact procedure 863 times in his career without incident, using the same portable download unit, following the same checklist, connecting to the same interface panel located in the tail section behind Access Panel 27 Alpha. The Boeing 737-800 utilized a Honeywell HFR-5V cockpit voice recorder, a solid-state device capable of storing 25 hours of 4-channel audio in crash-survivable memory. The unit was designed to automatically begin recording when aircraft power was applied and continue until power was removed, creating a continuous loop that preserved the most recent flight activities. Under normal circumstances, the CVR in a parked, powered-down aircraft should contain either complete silence or residual audio from the aircraft's last operational period, slowly overwriting itself in a predictable pattern. He connected the portable download unit to the CVR interface panel located in the tail section at 8:41 a.m. on November 14th. The ambient temperature in the cargo bay was 14 degrees Celsius. The air smelled of hydraulic fluid, cleaning solvents, and the metallic tang that permeated all aircraft maintenance areas. The download unit, a ruggedized laptop computer designed specifically for flight recorder data extraction, recognized the recorder immediately with its familiar series of electronic beeps and status lights. File size indicated approximately 1 hour and 57 minutes of audio, which was impossible. The CVR should have contained either silence or the residual audio from the aircraft's last scheduled flight 6 days prior, Flight 1786 from Denver to Chicago on November 9th. Instead, the timestamp showed the recording began at 2:17 a.m. on November 13th, exactly 36 hours earlier, while the plane sat locked and empty at the gate. The aircraft's electrical power had been confirmed disconnected at 11:23 p.m. on November 12th by maintenance supervisor Clark Henderson, who personally verified the main power switch positions and battery isolation before securing the aircraft for the night.
Gate security footage showed no personnel accessing the plane between Henderson's departure and the discovery of the recording. Hartwell assumed a date malfunction in the recorder's internal clock, a known issue with older CVR units exposed to electromagnetic interference or power fluctuations. He initiated playback through the unit's standard headphone interface, a set of aviation-grade noise-canceling headphones designed to isolate cockpit audio from ambient noise. The first 11 seconds were typical ambient noise, the low-frequency hum characteristic of an active cockpit, the barely audible whisper of air circulation systems, the distant electrical buzz of powered avionics. This background signature was consistent with a Boeing 737-800 at flight altitude approximately 31,000 feet, based on the acoustic analysis Hartwell had learned to recognize through years of CVR examination. Then a voice spoke, his voice.
Hydraulic pressure delta dropping, left system, confirm backup. The words were clear, transmitted through what sounded like a cockpit boom microphone, with the characteristic compression and filtering of the aircraft's intercom system. The tone was his. The cadence matched his speech pattern perfectly, including the slight pause he always inserted before technical terminology, and the way his voice rose slightly at the end of urgent instructions. But Hartwell had not been aboard that aircraft on November 13th. He had been home in Aurora, Colorado, asleep in bed next to his wife Margaret. His shift began at 7 a.m. on the 14th, and his keycard access logs at Continental Regional confirmed he had not entered the facility between 6 p.m. on November 12th and 6:53 a.m. on November 14th. He stopped playback immediately. His hands were shaking, a tremor that started in his fingertips and spread through his forearms. The sensation was unfamiliar and deeply unsettling. He had examined hundreds of CVR files, many containing the final moments of fatal accidents, the last words of doomed crews, but nothing had ever affected him physically like hearing his own voice speaking words he had never said. He checked the recorder serial number against the aircraft documents, HFR 5V-77439. Correct match. He examined the download unit for software corruption, running a complete diagnostic sequence that checked memory integrity, processor function, and interface protocols. All systems were clean. He disconnected everything, waited 3 minutes to allow any residual electrical charges to dissipate, reconnected using a different USB cable, and verified the connection 3 times. The file remained. File size, 1 hour, 57 minutes, 14 seconds. Creation timestamp, November 13th, 2023, 02:17 GMT. He pressed play again, this time recording the session on his phone as a backup. This time, he let it run. The voice that sounded exactly like him continued speaking for 41 uninterrupted minutes, issuing technical commands with the precision and terminology of a senior maintenance engineer, referencing system failures with intimate knowledge of Boeing 737 hydraulic architecture, communicating with what appeared to be a flight crew responding to a progressive in-flight emergency. Other voices were present on the recording. A captain whose voice carried the controlled urgency of someone managing a serious but not yet critical situation. He spoke with the clipped professionalism typical of airline pilots, using standard phraseology but with an undertone of growing concern that became more pronounced as the recording progressed. A first officer was also audible, his voice younger, less experienced, and increasingly strained as the situation deteriorated. By the 20-minute mark, this voice cracked with barely controlled panic, the kind of vocal distress pattern Hartwell had heard in CVR recordings from actual accidents where young co-pilots face situations beyond their training. Air traffic control instructions came through the aircraft's radio system, transmitted with the characteristic static and compression of VHF aviation communications. The controller's voice was calm but insistent, providing heading changes, altitude instructions, and emergency vectors toward what sounded like Denver International Airport. Alarms were present throughout the recording. First, the intermittent chime of a hydraulic system caution, a sound Hartwell knew intimately from his years maintaining Boeing aircraft. Then, the more urgent synthetic warning tones of a terrain awareness and warning system, the electronic voice that announced, "Terrain, terrain, pull up, pull up, with increasing frequency as the recording progressed.
The cockpit area microphone picked up other sounds, the mechanical noise of circuit breakers being reset, the whoosh of air rushing past the aircraft at high speed, and beneath it all, the steady drone of engines operating at high power settings. All of this took place inside an aircraft that had been powered down and empty. The maintenance logs were unambiguous. Aircraft November 738 Alfa Romeo had not been operational since November 9th. Its engines had not run. Its electrical systems had not been activated. Its hydraulic pumps had not operated. Yet, the CVR contained nearly 2 hours of audio suggesting the aircraft had experienced a serious in-flight emergency requiring complex troubleshooting and emergency landing procedures. At 28 minutes into the recording, his voice said something that made Hartwell vomit into a nearby trash bin, a reaction so violent and immediate it surprised him.
We have maybe 4 minutes before hydraulic failure is total. I'm telling you to dump fuel and attempt gear down manually. Do it now or we all die here. The words were spoken with desperate authority, the tone of someone who understood exactly how dire the situation had become and was making life or death decisions in real time. He had never spoken those words. He had never been in a situation requiring them. He had never been aboard an aircraft experiencing total hydraulic failure, but the voice was unmistakably his, down to the slight rasp he had developed after a bout with bronchitis in 2021, a distinctive vocal characteristic that even his wife commented on occasionally. The vomiting was followed by a cold sweat that soaked through his coveralls and made him dizzy. He had to sit down on a nearby equipment cart, his legs suddenly unsteady.
The sensation lasted several minutes, accompanied by a ringing in his ears and a metallic taste in his mouth that reminded him of blood. These physical symptoms had no logical explanation. He was not ill, he had not eaten anything unusual, he had not been exposed to any chemicals or fumes that might cause such a reaction. Yet hearing his own voice describe an aviation emergency he had never experienced triggered a physiological response as if his body remembered something his mind did not. Hartwell called his supervisor, Martin Geiger, a former FAA inspector with 31 years of field experience investigating maintenance-related incidents and avionics anomalies. Geiger had seen everything the aviation industry could produce: catastrophic failures, inexplicable malfunctions, equipment behaviors that defied technical explanation. His reputation was built on methodical analysis and an ability to find logical solutions to seemingly impossible problems. If anyone could explain what Hartwell had discovered, it would be Geiger. Geiger arrived at the tail section 12 minutes later, moving with the purposeful stride of someone accustomed to responding to urgent maintenance issues. He was a tall man in his late 50s, gray-haired and perpetually serious, wearing the rumpled coveralls and steel-toed boots that were uniform among senior aviation maintenance personnel. His expression shifted from routine concern to sharp attention when he saw Hartwell's pale, sweaty appearance and the acrid smell of vomit still lingering in the confined space of the aircraft's tail section. Hartwell played the file from the beginning without explanation, using a second set of headphones so they could both listen simultaneously. Geiger's face remained impassive for the first 5 minutes, the expression of a professional evaluating technical data. But as the recording continued, and the voice that unmistakably belonged to Thomas Hartwell issued increasingly urgent maintenance instructions to a crew that should not have existed, Geiger's expression changed. His jaw tightened, his eyes narrowed. At 6 minutes and 37 seconds, he stopped playback with an abrupt gesture and removed his headphones. "Is this some kind of practical joke? How did you record this?" Geiger's voice carried the controlled anger of someone who did not appreciate having his time wasted with elaborate hoaxes. But Hartwell could see uncertainty in his supervisor's eyes, the kind of doubt that crept in when logical explanations began to fail. Hartwell assured him he had nothing to do with it, explaining the timeline, the security protocols, the impossibility of accessing the aircraft during the recording period. Geiger listened in silence, his expression growing more troubled with each detail. Geiger ordered a full system diagnostic and contacted the airline's safety office immediately. Within 2 hours, 3 additional engineers, 1 FAA inspector, and Continental's regional safety director were standing in the jetway beside the aircraft reviewing the CVR file on 4 separate playback devices. Every unit confirmed the same data, same file size, same timestamp, same impossible content. The crowd of investigators grew as word spread through the maintenance facility. By afternoon, 8 people had listened to the recording. All confirmed it was Thomas Hartwell's voice. None could explain how it got there. The FAA inspector, a woman named Caroline Braddock with 16 years investigating avionics anomalies, suggested tampering as the most logical explanation. She theorized someone had accessed the recorder externally and uploaded fabricated audio using sophisticated equipment and voice synthesis technology. Modern audio manipulation software could replicate voices with startling accuracy given sufficient source material. Continental Regional employed dozens of technicians who had worked with Hartwell for years, recording conversations during training sessions, safety briefings, and routine maintenance communications. The raw material existed to create a convincing fake. Hartwell pointed out the physical security seals on the CVR access panel. They were intact, undisturbed. The tamper evidence strips showed no signs of removal or replacement. The panel required 2 separate keys and a security code to open, part of Continental's enhanced security protocols implemented after several incidents of recorder tampering at other facilities. Only 5 people at Denver International had authorization: Hartwell, Geiger, Safety Director Patricia Valdez, Chief Maintenance Officer Robert Chen, and Facility Security Manager Douglas Wright.
Hartwell's access logs showed no entry to that aircraft between November 10th and November 14th. Surveillance footage from the gate confirmed it. No one had accessed the tail section during the time frame the audio was allegedly recorded. The recording itself presented additional problems that became apparent as the investigation deepened. Audio forensic analysis conducted the following week by an independent contractor specializing in cockpit voice recorder authenticity confirmed the file contained no evidence of editing, splicing, or digital manipulation. The contractor, a former NTSB investigator named Dr. Sarah Kim, had analyzed over 300 CVR files in her career and testified as an expert witness in multiple aviation legal proceedings. Her report was unambiguous. The audio was genuine in every measurable aspect.
The background noise signature matched the acoustic profile of a Boeing 737-800 cockpit during powered flight with remarkable precision. Engine harmonics were consistent with CFM56-7 engines operating at cruise power settings. Airflow resonance patterns matched the aerodynamic signature of the aircraft, traveling at approximately 450 knots true airspeed. Electronic interference patterns were consistent with multiple avionics systems operating simultaneously under high electrical load conditions. Most significantly, the pressure differential acoustic signature indicated the aircraft was pressurized and operating at approximately 31,000 feet altitude. But the aircraft had never been airborne during the recording period. Dr. Kim's analysis went deeper. Voice stress patterns in the recording showed physiological markers consistent with genuine human fear and adrenaline response.
The captain's voice exhibited microtremors and breathing patterns typical of someone experiencing actual life-threatening stress, not simulated emergency conditions. The first officer's vocal patterns showed classic signs of acute stress response: elevated pitch, shortened breathing intervals, and speech acceleration patterns that matched documented examples from actual aviation emergencies. Most disturbing was Hartwell's voice, which demonstrated technical knowledge and situational awareness that could only come from someone actually experiencing the emergency described. Braddock ordered the CVR removed and sent to the National Transportation Safety Board laboratory in Washington for deeper analysis. The unit was carefully extracted by 2 certified technicians using standard protocols, placed in an anti-static containment case, and shipped via courier to the NTSB facility in Virginia.
While the unit was in transit, Hartwell began experiencing symptoms he initially attributed to stress and the psychological impact of hearing his own voice in an impossible situation. Insomnia struck first. He would lie in bed staring at the ceiling, unable to silence the memory of his own voice speaking words he had never said. Sleep, when it came, brought vivid dreams of aircraft emergencies, hydraulic failures, and desperate attempts to save planes he had never flown aboard. He would wake with his heart racing, sheets soaked with sweat, the taste of metal in his mouth. Margaret grew concerned when he began talking in his sleep, muttering technical instructions and emergency procedures in the darkness of their bedroom. Acute anxiety followed. Simple tasks became difficult. He found himself checking and rechecking routine maintenance procedures, unable to trust his own expertise. His hands shook when handling delicate avionics equipment. Concentration became elusive.
He would start a task and forget what he was doing midway through, standing in aircraft cargo bays with tools in his hands and no memory of why he was there. Most disturbing was a persistent sensation that he was being observed. While working alone in aircraft tail sections, he would feel eyes watching him, turn around expecting to see a colleague or supervisor, and find empty space. The feeling was so strong it became physically uncomfortable, a crawling sensation between his shoulder blades that made him glance over his shoulder dozens of times during each shift. Security cameras showed him working alone, but the feeling of surveillance never left. On November 17th, 3 days after discovering the recording, he woke at 2:17 a.m., the exact time the phantom recording had begun. His bedroom was silent, except for a faint mechanical hum he couldn't locate.
It sounded like an auxiliary power unit spooling up, the distinctive whine of a small gas turbine engine reaching operating speed. The sound seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, filling the room with a low-frequency vibration that he felt in his chest more than heard with his ears. Margaret remained asleep, undisturbed by the noise that seemed to exist only for him. He searched the house methodically, checking every appliance, every electronic device, every possible source of mechanical noise. The refrigerator was quiet. The heating system was off. The dishwasher was not running. Yet the sound continued for exactly 17 minutes before fading gradually, leaving behind a silence that felt somehow unnatural and oppressive. He spent the remainder of the night sitting in his living room, afraid to return to bed, watching the clock and wondering if the sound would return at the same time the following night. It did, and the night after that, always starting at 2:17 a.m., always lasting 17 minutes. Always the same mechanical hum that reminded him of aircraft auxiliary power units, but somehow felt wrong, distorted, as if the sound was coming from somewhere else entirely and merely echoing through his bedroom. Margaret never heard it. When he played recordings made on his phone during these episodes, the audio contained only silence. The NTSB report arrived on December 1st. The findings were disturbing in their thoroughness and their failure to provide rational explanations. The CVR was functioning normally. No hardware defects were detected. No firmware corruption was found. No external tampering was evident. The audio file was genuine in the sense that it had been recorded by the device's internal microphones in real time at the timestamp indicated. The laboratory could not explain how the recording occurred without the aircraft being operational, powered, and airborne.
More troubling was the voice analysis conducted by the NTSB's Audio Forensics Laboratory, the same facility that had analyzed CVR files from major aviation accidents for over 30 years. Biometric voice printing confirmed the individual issuing maintenance instructions in the recording was a 97.4% match to Thomas Hartwell. The margin of error was statistically negligible. The probability of another person naturally possessing such similar vocal characteristics was calculated at less than 1 in 4 million. Voice synthesis technology, sophisticated enough to fool biometric analysis, existed but required extensive source material and specialized equipment worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. The NTSB investigators interviewed Hartwell for 4 hours, probing for inconsistencies in his account, searching for evidence of deception or mental instability.
They examined his financial records for unusual transactions that might indicate payments for sophisticated audio manipulation services. They interviewed his colleagues, his family, and his friends, looking for any indication he might be involved in an elaborate hoax. They found nothing. Everyone described him as reliable, methodical, and completely without motive for such an elaborate deception. Hartwell refused to listen to the full recording until December 6th, when Geiger and Braddock insisted he hear the final 22 minutes. They gathered in a secure conference room at the Continental Regional Facility, using professional audio equipment to ensure complete clarity. The recording had been digitally enhanced to eliminate background noise and improve voice clarity, making every word unnaturally sharp and distinct. By the time the playback reached the final 22 minutes, the situation in the Phantom cockpit had deteriorated beyond any hope of recovery. The captain was screaming, his voice raw with desperation and terror. The words were fragmented, interrupted by alarms and the mechanical groaning of an aircraft being pushed beyond its structural limits. Jesus Christ, we're not going to make it. The gear won't lock. Tom, tell me we have something, anything. The first officer was praying in Spanish, his words rapid and nearly unintelligible through tears and hyperventilation. Dios mío, ayúdanos, por favor, ayúdanos. The prayer became a chant, repeated over and over as the situation spiraled toward inevitable catastrophe. But it was his own voice that disturbed Hartwell most. The voice in the recording had become hoarse, desperate, exhausted. It spoke with the authority of someone who had exhausted every technical option and was now facing the reality of imminent death. Captain, hydraulic pressure is gone in all systems. Manual reversion is not possible. Landing gear will not extend. Flaps are frozen at 5 degrees. We have no flight controls except engine thrust. At 1 hour 31 minutes into the file, the terrain warning system began its automated chant. Terrain, terrain, pull up, pull up. The synthetic voice was relentless, mechanical, devoid of emotion even as it announced approaching death. His voice shouted over the alarm, barely audible above the cacophony of warnings, prayers, and mechanical destruction. Gear is not locked. We're going in without gear. Brace positions now. Brace, brace, brace. Then impact. Not the explosive destruction typically associated with aircraft accidents, but a prolonged, grinding roar of metal tearing through earth and vegetation. The sound lasted 47 seconds, a sustained mechanical scream as the aircraft disintegrated across whatever terrain it had encountered. Screaming was audible throughout, human voices raised in terror and agony, gradually fading as the microphones were destroyed or the people making the sounds were silenced. Fire alarms added their electronic warnings to the chaos. The hiss of ruptured hydraulic lines created a constant background whisper. The groaning of twisted metal punctuated the audio as the aircraft structure continued to fail even after the initial impact. And beneath it all, barely audible but distinctly present, was a sound that did not belong. A rhythmic tapping, deliberate, mechanical. 3 taps, pause. 3 taps, pause. It continued for 16 seconds after all other sounds had faded. Then silence. The file ended. Hartwell sat in the conference room staring at the audio equipment for several minutes after playback concluded. His face was pale, his hands clasped tightly in his lap to control their shaking. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "That's not how I would handle that emergency. The procedures in the recording are wrong, outdated. We stopped using those hydraulic failure protocols in 2018. Geiger leaned forward. "What do you mean?" "The manual gear extension procedure he described. My voice described. It's from the old maintenance manual, the one we used before the Boeing Service Bulletin changed the emergency checklist. No one at Continental has used those procedures for 5 years, but somehow my voice in that recording knew them perfectly." The NTSB listed the case as an unexplained anomaly and suspended further investigation pending additional evidence. Continental Regional quietly removed aircraft November 738 Alfa Romeo from service and placed it in long-term storage at a facility in Roswell, New Mexico. The decision was made without publicity, buried in routine fleet management paperwork. The aircraft was ferried to storage on December 15th by a crew that was not told about the CVR anomaly and instructed to perform only the minimum required flight operations.
Hartwell requested reassignment to a different airport, preferably somewhere far from Denver, and the aircraft that had somehow recorded his voice speaking words he had never said. His request was denied. Instead, he was placed on paid administrative leave for psychological evaluation, a decision that satisfied legal requirements while avoiding the publicity that would result from a formal investigation or termination. During his leave, Hartwell began researching similar incidents, using aviation safety databases, internet forums, and industry contacts he had developed over 22 years in the field. What he found was disturbing. Scattered references to similar events existed, but were consistently dismissed, explained away, or suppressed. A Lufthansa technician in Frankfurt reported in 2011 that he had heard unfamiliar voices on a CVR from an aircraft that had been in a hangar for 3 weeks. The file was attributed to electromagnetic interference and dismissed without investigation. An Air France engineer in 2016 claimed a cockpit voice recorder from an Airbus A320 played a conversation in a language none of the regular crew spoke. The recording contained technical discussions about hydraulic failures and emergency procedures, but the speakers used terminology and procedures that had not been current for over a decade. The file was classified as a data corruption event and deleted from the airline's systems. In 2019, a Singapore Airlines mechanic heard his own voice on a recorder from a Boeing 777 he had never worked on. The aircraft had been grounded for engine maintenance, powered down and empty for 6 days. The CVR contained 43 minutes of audio showing the mechanic discussing complex avionics failures while apparently aboard the aircraft during flight.
He was terminated for filing a false report after security footage confirmed he had not accessed the aircraft during the time period in question. None of the cases resulted in formal investigations. All were explained away as technical malfunctions, human error, or fabrication. Industry policies discouraged reporting such anomalies, and individuals who persisted in making claims about impossible CVR recordings found their careers effectively ended. But Hartwell found a disturbing pattern among those who had experienced these events. Psychological disturbances followed in every case. Insomnia, auditory hallucinations, a recurring dream of being aboard an aircraft in distress, usually involving the same type of emergency described in their phantom recording. 2 of the individuals had died. Klaus Weber, the Lufthansa technician, was killed in a car accident 6 months after his report. Police investigation showed he had fallen asleep at the wheel despite having no history of fatigue-related driving problems. Henri Dubois, the Air France engineer, died by suicide 4 months after his report was dismissed. His suicide note mentioned hearing voices and seeing aircraft that were not there, but no one connected these symptoms to his earlier CVR report. The Singapore Airlines mechanic, Chen Wei-ming, was still alive but had been committed to a psychiatric facility after claiming he could hear aircraft engines in his apartment and see phantom planes landing in nearby parking lots. His family refused to discuss his condition with researchers, and the facility would not release information about his treatment. On December 19th, Hartwell received a call from an unlisted number. His phone rang once at 2:17 a.m., waking him from the few hours of sleep he had managed to achieve. He answered without thinking, still groggy and disoriented. The voice on the line was his own. It spoke for 11 seconds with perfect clarity, using the same tone and speech patterns he recognized from the CVR recording. "You heard what happens. You know when. Stop asking questions." The call disconnected immediately. His phone showed no record of the incoming call. The call log was empty. When he checked with his cellular provider the following day, their records showed no calls to his number during the time period in question. He reported the incident to Braddock, who arranged for his phone to be forensically examined by the same contractor who had analyzed the CVR audio. No evidence of tampering, spoofing, or technical manipulation was found. The phone examination did reveal one anomaly. During the time period when Hartwell claims to have received the impossible call, his phone had briefly connected to a cellular tower that did not exist.
The tower ID in the connection log corresponded to equipment that had been decommissioned and removed 3 years earlier. The physical location where the tower had once stood was now an empty lot. Yet his phone had somehow connected to this non-existent tower for exactly 11 seconds at 2:17 a.m. On January 4, 2024, Hartwell was cleared for return to duty following psychological evaluation. The psychiatrist found no evidence of mental illness, substance abuse, or cognitive impairment. His symptoms were attributed to stress related to the unusual circumstances of his case and the natural psychological impact of hearing his own voice in an impossible context. The evaluation recommended he return to work with regular follow-up appointments to monitor his mental health. Hartwell declined to return.
He submitted his resignation on January 9th, forfeiting his pension and benefits rather than continue working in an environment where impossible things happened and rational explanations failed. Continental Regional accepted his resignation without contest, relieved to close a case that had generated uncomfortable questions and unwanted attention from federal investigators. Geiger called him privately before his departure and asked if he wanted to know what had happened to the CVR from November 738 Alfa Romeo. Hartwell said no, but Geiger told him anyway. The NTSB had stored the unit in a secure facility in Virginia, part of their collection of evidence from unresolved cases. On December 28th, a technician conducting routine archive maintenance had connected the unit to a diagnostic system for periodic data integrity verification. The file was still there, but it had changed. The recording now lasted 2 hours and 9 minutes, 12 minutes longer than the original version. The additional audio was disturbing. It contained Hartwell's voice, alone, repeating 3 words with mechanical precision. "It's still coming. It's still coming. It's still coming." The phrase was repeated 174 times during the 12-minute extension, never varying in tone, pace, or inflection. The technician who discovered the updated file was David Morrison, a 23-year veteran of NTSB audio analysis with clearance to handle sensitive materials from major accident investigations. He had processed CVR files from dozens of fatal accidents without psychological impact. But hearing Hartwell's voice mechanically chanting about something that was still coming affected him profoundly. He requested immediate transfer to a different department, citing personal reasons. The request was granted within 48 hours. The CVR was placed in a shielded containment unit designed to block all electromagnetic signals, including radio waves, cellular communications, and wireless data transmissions. Access was restricted to Level 4 clearance only, requiring authorization from multiple department heads and documented justification for any examination. The unit was sealed with tamper-evident materials and stored in a climate-controlled vault designed for long-term preservation of critical evidence. No one has opened the unit since. Hartwell now lives in rural Montana, 147 miles from the nearest commercial airport. He purchased a small cabin on 38 acres of mountainous terrain, isolated from neighbors and far from the aviation industry that had been his career for over 2 decades. He does not fly. He avoids anything related to aviation. He has no internet connection and uses only a basic cellular phone for emergency communications. But the distance and isolation have not ended his symptoms. On certain nights, usually around 2:17 a.m., he wakes to the sound of his own voice, distant and distorted, giving instructions to a crew that does not exist, aboard a flight that never happened. The voice is always his, but the words are different each time. Sometimes he hears himself describing electrical failures, sometimes hydraulic problems, sometimes engine malfunctions that require immediate emergency landing procedures. He has recorded these episodes on his phone during the few occasions when he remained conscious and alert enough to operate the device. The audio is clear when played back. It is unmistakably his voice. But when he records video simultaneously, the footage shows him sleeping silently in bed, his mouth closed, no movement of his lips or throat. The voice comes from somewhere else, somewhere beyond the physical room, but somehow connected to his presence. Margaret left him in March 2024. She could not handle the nightly episodes, the mechanical sound of auxiliary power units that only he could hear, and the growing certainty that her husband was experiencing something that defied rational explanation. She loved him, but love was not enough to overcome the fear that whatever was happening to him might somehow spread to her. They divorced quietly, without acrimony, both understanding that the situation was beyond anyone's ability to fix or explain. In March 2024, aircraft number 738 Alfa Romeo was quietly scrapped at the Roswell storage facility. The decision was made without publicity, part of routine fleet management as older aircraft were retired and replaced with more efficient models. The dismantling process required careful removal of all recoverable components, including the flight recorders, before the airframe was cut apart for scrap metal.
The CVR was supposed to be removed prior to disassembly according to standard procedures. Records indicate it was successfully extracted and shipped to Continental Regional's parts warehouse in Phoenix for eventual redistribution to other aircraft. But when the dismantling crew cut into the tail section on March 15th, they found the recorders still installed, locked in place with the original mounting bolts and security seals intact. The access panel had never been opened. The recorder inside was a different unit entirely. The serial number was HFR 5V-9981, which did not match any database of manufactured recorders. Honeywell International, the manufacturer, confirmed that no recorder with that serial number had ever been produced at any of their facilities. The unit appeared to be physically identical to a standard HFR 5, but contained internal components that did not match any known configuration.
Continental Regional has no explanation for how a non-existent recorder came to be installed in an aircraft that was supposed to be empty of all recording equipment. The company quietly disposed of the mysterious unit through standard hazardous waste procedures and classified the incident as an inventory control error. No investigation was conducted. No reports were filed with federal authorities. But there is one more detail that was not included in any official documentation. The dismantling crew supervisor, a man named Robert Torres with 15 years of experience in aircraft recycling, connected the mysterious recorder to a portable playback unit before disposal. Professional curiosity, he later explained. He wanted to know what, if anything, was recorded on a device that should not have existed. The recorder contained one file. Duration, 2 hours and 21 minutes. It was Thomas Hartwell's voice, alone, speaking continuously in the measured tone of someone reading from a technical manual. But he was not reading maintenance procedures or emergency checklists. He was describing in precise detail every person who had listened to the original recording. Their names, their addresses, their families, their daily routines, and their deaths. Not deaths that had occurred, but deaths that would occur. Dates, times, locations, and methods were specified with the same technical precision Hartwell used when describing hydraulic system failures. Klaus Weber would die in a car accident on May 14, 2011, at 3:27 a.m. Henri Dubois would hang himself on August 9, 2016, using a rope purchased 3 days earlier. Chen Wei-ming would die in the psychiatric facility on December 2, 2024, from complications related to self-inflicted injuries. Torres stopped playback after 4 minutes and destroyed the recording without listening further. He quit his job the following day and moved to a different state, telling no one about what he had heard. But 2 weeks later, Chen Wei-ming died in Singapore exactly as the recording had described. Torres learned about the death through online news reports and realized that Thomas Hartwell's voice had somehow predicted events that occurred 8 years after the original recording was made. What you just heard is documented in partially redacted incident reports, internal memos, and testimony from 7 individuals who were present during the initial discovery. The FAA has never issued a public statement about the case. The NTSB file remains open but dormant, buried in their archives of unexplained anomalies. Continental Regional dissolved in 2024 following unrelated financial difficulties, and their maintenance records were scattered among multiple successor companies. Thomas Hartwell declined multiple interview requests for this investigation. His current location is unknown. The Montana cabin was abandoned in late 2024, and his whereabouts have not been confirmed since. But there are reports from small airports across the western United States of maintenance workers hearing voices that sound like their own, speaking words they never said, describing emergencies they never experienced. The reports are dismissed as stress-related hallucinations or elaborate hoaxes. No investigations are conducted. But on November 13, 2023, the night the phantom recording allegedly occurred, air traffic control at Denver International logged an unidentified radar contact at 2:19 a.m. The target appeared at 31,000 feet, 14 miles south of the airport, moving northwest at 470 knots indicated airspeed. It was tracked for 6 minutes before disappearing from radar coverage. No flight plan was filed. No aircraft was reported missing. No emergency was declared. The FAA classified it as a radar anomaly, a common occurrence caused by atmospheric conditions, equipment malfunction, or unknown objects that briefly appear on radar screens before vanishing without explanation. But the coordinates and altitude match exactly the flight parameters embedded in the cockpit voice recorder file. And according to the radar track, the unidentified contact was descending rapidly during its final 2 minutes of visibility, following a flight path consistent with an aircraft in distress attempting an emergency landing at Denver International Airport. The contact disappeared from radar at the exact moment the CVR recording ended, 2:17 and 53 seconds a.m. on November 14, 2023. Exactly when Thomas Hartwell's voice stopped speaking and the phantom aircraft completed its impossible journey from somewhere else to nowhere at all. What do you think happened aboard that plane that never flew? Was Thomas Hartwell hearing a future event, a parallel timeline, or something else entirely that exists beyond our understanding of reality? Have you ever experienced something that shouldn't have been possible, something that challenged everything you thought you knew about how the world works? Share your theory in the comments and subscribe for more forbidden aviation investigations you will not see anywhere else.